begin with the police investigation, police conduct, because that's where we are now in the trial. The police officers on the stand, the defense cross-examining F.B. Bailey trying to make points. Your view of what we've heard so far about the kind of work the police did, was it sloppy or was it reasonable?
Well, I think the police definitely had a responsibility to maintain the integrity of the crime scene. And as we can see, for the most part, that was not done.
So as a former cop, so far from what you've heard, you think that there were things that should have been done? Can you give us one example of where you're troubled?
Well, I think probably a high-profile case such as this, detectives know going in that there's going to be a lot of media, there's going to be a lot of publicity associated with the case. So you use extra measures to ensure the integrity of the crime scene. Where you might have one officer standing by to ensure that people coming in and out of the crime scene noted and notes are made with regard to why they're there and what the purpose is.
Do you think basically there were too many officers going back and forth? Is that what you're saying?
Well, oftentimes when you get to a crime scene, a lot of things occur. When you have two baddies, you could have technicians from the fire department, ambulance service. But your first priority is going to be the saving of lives. So once it's established that that is not a possibility,
dead, right.
then you get enough people at the scene to maintain that scene's integrity.
Let's get to your view, because you have a slightly different view. What you've heard so far in the testimony, you say the police conduct seems reasonable.
Well, there are certainly some mistakes that they made, and Detective Smith is certainly right that you have to maintain the integrity. And in high visibility cases, there's often a tendency for people to show up, officers to show up, officials to show up who aren't as used to the maintaining of the integrity of a crime scene as detectives and crime scene technicians are. That having been said, the defense has as its job to exploit every minor inconsistency, every little issue that took place in the gathering of the evidence, really whether or not it ultimately has any impact. Remember, the jury hasn't seen, by and large, they haven't seen homicide trials before. This is all fresh and new to them. If you've seen a lot of homicide trials, the things that are coming out in terms of the evidence gathering aren't that different than you see in a lot of cases, or there may be a few extra problems. But if you're a juror who hasn't seen it, it looks like this was a particularly sloppy crime scene.
Yeah, F.B. Bailey, just impression so far. How's he doing? Great style, but is he scoring any points? What do you think?
Well, I think he's doing using everything that he has available to him to impact on the jury, that the police did some things that perhaps they could have done better. And when you're in that type of situation, what you want to do is look over the prosecution case with a fine-tooth comb. And every time that you can score a point, you take advantage of that opportunity.
I think yesterday was a perfect example. You had the officer, he takes an officer who has a very limited role on the crime scene, and he starts cross-examining him about things that aren't his role, that he's not supposed to do at a crime scene. And what he makes it appear is that he's not concerned about other things that are going on at the crime scene. It's not that he's not concerned about it, it's just, as Detective Smith knows, everybody has their own individual role when they get to a crime scene. So it's sort of easy pickings, and he has got a marvelous style to be able to do it. It's easy pickings to be able to get this particular officer who has a limited role and appear to make him look bad for not doing something that he's not supposed to do.
I heard for the first time yesterday the prosecution saying that it has blood, that matched blood, on the rear gate of the crime scene, the Bundy Townhouse, to O.J. Simpson. Significant?
Very significant. Any time that you have an opportunity to place your suspect at the scene of the offense through any type of evidence, especially blood, fingerprints, etc., it devastates the case of the defense, and they're going to have to dig in and really create some cross-examination techniques to deal with that particular evidence.
Obviously, this is going to be about the defense's questioning when the test was done and, the things like that. How do you expect the defense to deal with this when it comes up?
Well, the biggest problem they have, of course, is that it may be easy to try to argue that there is one person who was involved in an effort to try to frame O.J. Simpson. But the more evidence that comes up of this nature, the more you're going to have to try to expand the number of people. And then the question becomes, Why were all these people on the LAPD trying to frame this one guy, and how did they all manage in about an 8 or 10 hour period to join together and come up with some common plan to do that? I think what the defense is going to try to do is, much as Bailey did yesterday, look bad in that context and then hope that they've thrown enough of these pieces of dirt against the wall that something's going to stick.
That time we'll stick and the jury will have some reasonable doubt. Thank you for coming on. More time to run very quickly because so many developments yesterday. We appreciate it. 7:14 coming up. Forget about downsizing. Should the government just kill the departments of energy, education? Stan, he's expected back today. Today also expected to be the end for his testimony. Yesterday, he was allowed to give his single killer theory of the case. Joining us now to discuss the latest testimony and what may be ahead are defense attorney Lawrence Barcella and former D.C. Homicide Detective Victor Smith. Thank you both for coming in. Today should be his last day on the stand. They thought it was going to be yesterday, but it appears that they are winding down. I'm sorry, with Detective Lang, the lead investigator. From what you've heard so far, did he make the case for the defense of sloppy police were here, or is the prosecution claims that they did a reasonable job?
I think they did a reasonable job. I think you're going to always have incidents where certain things are going to be forgotten. And the key word is sometimes saying, I don't have a recollection of that event. You don't want to commit yourself to a situation that you don't really have a recollection of. So in that case, with regard to the shoes, it was an incident where it was kind of embarrassing for him, but that happens when you're doing so many things at a time.
We should explain that the videotape we just saw you, if you want to roll it again, he had O.J. Simpson's tennis shoes under his arm on sort of a notebook thing. He throws them in his car as opposed they weren't in an evidence bag, and he didn't even book them that same day. So that was clearly embarrassing. Yeah.
It's really embarrassing, but I don't think it's going to impact at all on the overall circumstances of the case.
Yeah, overall, was he effective for the prosecution? Did the defense score some points on this matter? Boy, this was sloppy. Look at you, Chief Investigator Lang, what you didn't do, what you didn't pursue.
I think overall he was very effective, especially at the end on redirect. Most of the trial balloons, and that's where the expression comes from, that were raised by Johnny Cochran, I think got popped pretty well.
That's where it comes from?
That's where it comes from.
Yeah, so when attorneys during a trial raise something, that's where we got that saying. Okay.
Absolutely, and in this case what happened was the 4 or 5 theories that Cochran sort of started to spell out in his opening statement, as well as in the cross-examination of some other witnesses. A lot of those got popped. He opened the door during cross-examination, and Lang walked through the door on redirect, and I think it was pretty effective.
Yeah. And that's a very interesting legal point, isn't it? Because Marsha Clark came very close to being able to ask, do you think O.J. Simpson did it? Which clearly wouldn't be permitted because only the jury can determine that, but she was able to come pretty close, wasn't she?
Yeah, and especially without specifically qualifying him as an expert. He had testified about 20 years worth of homicide investigations, but was not qualified as an expert. It wasn't an expert opinion, it was his theory of what had happened. And in fact, she prefaced it by saying, I'm not asking for your opinion on the guilt or innocence, I'm just asking for your theory, which...
Because Cochran had pressed so much about theories.
Yes.
Right? Victor Smith, as a former homicide detective, you've had to testify. I know you've been aware of other testimony in murder cases. Can you talk just a bit about when you are allowed to give theories of cases? That's pretty rare, isn't it, when you give it in that way?
Very rare. Usually outside the ear of the jury, the judge will ask you certain qualifying questions. And what he wants to determine is if you've had enough expertise in that particular area of investigation to be qualified as an expert. And when that occurs, he will bring the jury back in, and at that point in time, you'll be allowed to qualify your opinion as an expert in that particular area, only in that particular specific area.
Only in a very specific area.
That's correct, but not in the overall investigation.
Yeah. So did Johnny Cochran blow it, or did he have to go after him on this theory question, hope that the jury maybe would at least have some reasonable doubt about the possibility of another killer or drugs, whatever?
Oh, I think he had to go after him the way he did, and I think it's a question of throwing as many pieces of bread on the water as you can, and hoping that one juror or another is going to remember that, gobble it up, and sort of go back to it when they get into jury deliberations. But I also think Lang was a good. Yesterday's testimony was very good, in essence, to wrap Mark Furman with a little bit of credibility before he even takes the stand.
How so?
Well, in the sense that what you have is a situation where The Lang gives his theory, which theory is consistent with one person doing the murders. He talks about the crime scene basically being taken care of. There were mistakes, but basically in such a way that they preserved the evidence pretty carefully. And also the fact that, and he had earlier testified that there were 4 or 5 or 6 police officers who only observed a single glove at the murder scene. So again, what I think the prosecution is setting up is you're not just going to have to disbelieve Mark Furman, you're going to have to disbelieve almost every police officer who was at the scene.
Yeah, but let's talk about that because we may see Mark Furman on the stand today if the prosecution actually does call it, if they finish with Lang and the other things they're expected to do. What do you, the difficulty for the prosecution in dealing with this homicide detective who found a key piece of evidence? They have to put him on the stand. He says he found it. Your feelings as you look at this homicide detective coming from your background, especially. I'm curious.
Well, what I think at this point in time is that the prosecution's piling up points. The defense has to do something to kind of, make it an even ball game. So I think Mark Furman is the key to what they want to do in their defense case. They want to try to score some points while he's on the stand, and they're going to be taking every opportunity. I'm sure the judge is going to be giving him a lot of latitude with regard to asking a lot of different kinds of questions, but the impact on all of this is going to be whether or not they get to go into this file and find out if there have been any other kinds of occurrences that would allow them to get to where they want to get with regard to their line of questioning.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that Ito will allow the defense wide latitude, or will he limit the scope of the examination? Should the prosecutors be trying to limit the scope of the examination of Mark Furman?
Yes.
That was the compound question. Let's take one in turn. Answer any one of those you want.
Sure.
Go right ahead.
I think that the defense would love to know everything that's in the personnel file of Detective Furman, and I think there are going to be some things that the judge's history certainly during this trial is to give both sides a lot of latitude.
Right.
And although he seems to have tightened up a little bit in the past couple of days, this is really what the core of the defense has been about from the beginning. It's going to be a little difficult, given what he's done over the past couple of months, to suddenly limit on Furman. But it's such an explosive issue that I think he's going to try at least to channel a series of questions that they can ask and try to keep them from going outside those bounds. As things have shown over the past couple of months, he's going to have a hard time keeping a leash on either side.
Thank you both for coming in. The sentencing trial continues. We appreciate it. 8:30 still to come on